Hey mama, it was once thought that if you had a C-section, all your subsequent births needed to be C-sections as well. But research is telling us that that isn't necessarily the case, that once a C-section does not mean always a C-section. If you've had a previous C-section and you are hoping for a successful VBAC for your upcoming birth, this video is for you. With C-sections occurring about 1 in every 3 births, there are a lot of mamas out there just like you who are striving for a vaginal birth and putting in the work to make it happen. So if that's you, I think you're going to find lots of good information, encouragement, and empowerment in this video. I'm Bridget and I'm a doula and childbirth educator in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I love helping inform and empower moms through their childbearing experience. If you want to learn more about how you are built to birth, make sure you subscribe to this channel, click the little bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. Giving birth might feel overwhelming on its own, and then even more overwhelming if you're giving birth after a C-section, which is why having information and a plan of action for your upcoming birth is so helpful. By the end of this video, you will have 7 tips that can help you have your successful VBAC. So first of all, what is a VBAC? VBAC stands for vaginal birth after cesarean, and when you're talking about trying for a VBAC, you're probably going to hear the acronym TOLAC as well. TOLAC stands for trial of labor after cesarean, which means that you're going to try to have a labor that ends in a vaginal birth. If a TOLAC ends in success, you have had a VBAC, but if not, it means you needed a repeat C-section. But my goal is to give you several tips so that you can have a successful TOLAC which ends in a VBAC. And in order to do that, it's important to understand the benefits and risks involved in attempting a VBAC as well as an elective repeat C-section. Women attempting VBACs have a very high success rate of like 60 to 80% according to the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology if your pregnancy is considered low risk. So low risk factors include having only 1 prior C-section with a horizontal uterine incision, also known as a low transverse incision that cuts through the lower part of the uterus muscle. The more C-sections that you have, the riskier it is to attempt a VBAC, but not impossible. Lower risk VBACs also includes mama being at a healthy weight and ideal age, since being obese or older than 37 can increase the risk of a repeat C-section, and that mama's upcoming due date is at least 18 months since her previous C-section birth. So if you have a low transverse incision, which by the way can only be indicated by looking at your medical records, not just at the scar on your belly. If you are in a healthy weight range and younger than 37, and it's been at least 18 months since your last C-section, and especially if you've only had 1 C-section prior, then you are off to a really good start for attempting a VBAC. And the cherry on top for having a successful VBAC, according to research done by the BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth Journal, is that if you've had a previous vaginal at some point, you're more likely to have a VBAC. Or if your previous birth that had resulted in a C-section was due to a stalled first stage of labor rather than due to a failed induction of labor, which basically means that if your C-section was a result of you starting labor naturally but not progressing on its own, you have really good odds in your favor this time around. Now, successful TOLACs that end in a vaginal birth are the least risky way to give birth in terms of complications. And then the second less risky way is to have an elective repeat C-section. A VBAC will allow mom to avoid major abdominal surgery and face less long-term risks when it comes to healing and scar tissue buildup that comes with more C-sections. However, the risk that every mama carries who has had a previous C-section is uterine rupture. And uterine rupture is when the incision on the uterus tears open during labor. And if this happens and a TOLAC ends in a C-section, this situation poses the greatest risk of all for both mom and baby. With that being said though, uterine rupture happens only to 1 in 200 women and is really unlikely if you are considered low risk. So it's really important that you understand how good of a candidate you are for a VBAC through discussing it with your care provider. So that brings us to tip number 1, which is to find a supportive care provider. Not all care providers are as accepting of VBAC, so it's important that you find someone who listens to your concerns and desires and helps you understand what is actually feasible in terms of the kind of birth you can have, while also striving to help you accomplish your birth goals. You and your care provider should be a team, and if you guys are butting heads or finding them untrustworthy or uncomfortable to share vulnerable information with, it might be in your best interest to find a new provider. So some questions you can ask a provider to see how they feel about your situation are questions like, how do you feel about a planned VBAC? How many VBACs have you attended? In what ways do you help women have successful VBACs? And what is your C-section rate? Now, I know these questions might feel sort of forward and you might get some pushback for asking them, but if you do get pushback, it might not be a provider that you want to actually stick with for the long run. If you find someone open to answering these questions and what they're saying really resonates with you, you have likely found a supportive provider who can really help you achieve your VBAC. Now, if you want more questions to ask your care provider, there's a whole list of them on VBACfacts.com that I will link in the description below. So when you find your supportive provider, you want to make sure that you are going to work closely with them. Remember, you guys are now teammates, which is why trust and comfort are so important in this whole process. You need to trust that they have your best interest in mind, but also be able to voice your desires, your concerns, and expect them to support you in accomplishing your goals as much as they can. The second tip for a successful VBAC is to learn about your previous C-section, and doing this with your trusted care provider can be really helpful, as well as doing research on your own. The big question that you want to answer in learning about your VBAC is, was the C-section from a recurring or non-recurring issue? Or in other words, is it an issue likely to happen again? So for example, if your C-section was because baby was in a breech position or the heart rate pattern was showing concern, those are non-reoccurring issues that will make it more likely that you will have a successful VBAC. If, however, your C-section resulted from the shape of your pelvis that made pushing your baby through it really difficult or almost impossible, or if you're a mama that has a chronic health condition that makes it more likely for labor to result in a C-section, those are some recurring issues that you will need to consider when planning for your VBAC. And I want to be clear that if you do have a reoccurring issue, that does not mean that a VBAC is impossible. It just may mean you'll need to make certain plans in light of what that issue is. I also want to be clear that being told your pelvis is small doesn't mean you won't be able to have a vaginal birth. I would definitely seek out different opinions if, maybe your one OB said that, and realize that your body and your baby do really incredible things during pregnancy and labor to work together in order for your baby to fit through your pelvis. The other important thing to learn about from your previous C-section is what kind of incision was made. So like I said earlier, an incision that goes from side to side on the lower part of your uterus is the most desirable incision to have when you're attempting to have a VBAC for an upcoming birth. With that low transverse incision, the likelihood of uterine rupture is 1 in 200. But if you've had an incision that is that up and down one on that uterus, you'll likely be encouraged for an elective C-section, because on average, that up and down scar on the uterus will rupture in 8 to 12 out of every 100 women, which is significantly higher. So you'll definitely need to figure this information out with your doctor, because simply looking at the scar on your abdomen won't necessarily tell you what the scarring is on your uterus, which means you're going to have to look at your medical records for this information from your previous C-section. The third tip for a successful VBAC is fear clearing. Fear has a negative impact on the birthing body, and we know that feelings of fear or anxiety can cause labor to slow or even stop stop and often makes labor more difficult and painful. Now, if you want to learn more about how fear affects labor, you're going to want to check out this video that I'm linking up here right after this one. So since we want your body to be able to work as effortlessly and efficiently as possible, we need to address and clear out fears revolving around the birth experience. When you're able to replace fear with trust, intention with relaxation, and then pain with the allowance of your body to do the work that it needs to birth your baby, your likelihood for needing interventions or drugs for pain relief go way down, while your ability to move through labor with ease increases and your labor becomes shorter and more effective. And these are all things that you want for any labor, but especially for a VBAC. So fear clearing is a whole video in and of itself, which I've actually already made for you. So be sure to check it out. I'll link it right up here after you have completed this one to help just acknowledge, address, and clear out the fears that you may have revolving about pregnancy, birth, or postpartum. It's also important to realize that there might be a wall that you hit during labor that was the same point that you received a C-section last time. So think of ways before labor that your care team can mentally and emotionally support you to move past that point and trust that labor is progressing normally and safely for you and your baby. The fourth tip that I have for you is to write and commit to a birth plan, but to also have a plan B just in case. Knowledge is power, mama, so you want to go into this birth experience with as much of it as you can, and one of the best ways to help you do that is by writing a birth plan. A birth plan helps you understand what your options are, and as you learn about those options, it will really reveal the kind of birth that you are desiring. So once you've written a birth plan, it's so important that you bring it to your understanding and trusted healthcare provider just to discuss it and make sure that you guys are both on the same page. You want to make sure that they know what you want from your birth experience, and on the flip side, you also have to understand that because you have had a prior C-section, there are some things that they may have to do in order to keep a close eye on you and your baby throughout birth. So bringing in your birth plan will help facilitate necessary and beneficial communication between you and your care provider about your upcoming birth. When preparing for birth and writing out your birth preferences, it's important to remember that no birth is ever completely controllable, which is why having a plan B set in place will help you feel prepared for the possibility of another C-section. So include important factors about, your aftercare, seeing your baby for the first time, and whether or not your partner can be with you during that C-section. All of these aspects, again, open up the door for that necessary communication between you and your care provider, and then help you feel more ready if things don't go according to plan. And if another C-section is what's necessary, you can be so confident in that decision because you educated yourself and came in with a plan that you and your care team used to help with the best of everyone's ability to help you have that vaginal birth. And if a C-section is what was necessary, you can really actually appreciate having that C-section, because it's what allowed you to have a safe and healthy baby at the end of it all. And the point of a birth plan is to learn about your options and have preferences in place that help you avoid unnecessary interventions that could end in an unnecessary C-section. Tip number 5 is to hire a doula or bring a trusted and knowledgeable loved one into this experience. Having someone who knows how to support you physically, emotionally, and informationally is going to provide so much confidence going into your birth experience and all the way through it as well. A doula can also help you process through emotional trauma that maybe was a result of a previous birth and really bolster up your confidence for the one that is coming up. So having continuous support from a doula through labor helps reduce the use of drugs for induction or pain management. They decrease the risk for assisted vaginal births with vacuums or forceps and reduces the likelihood of a C-section. Now, I know that not everyone can have a doula, but it's honestly such a big recommendation for women who are planning for a VBAC. Now, if that's really not an option, having a trusted and knowledgeable loved one can really help as well. And the important factor is knowledgeable. You really want to have the support of someone who has experience with birth and even better VBACs and who can help you and your partner through every stage of that labor process. The sixth tip that I have for you is to join a community that encourages, shares information, and inspires you for your VBAC. Birth stories are so powerful and they can either be negatively impactful or positively impactful. And finding a community that shares real positive VBAC stories and bits of advice can help you get excited for your birth experience that's coming up. I recently worked with a mama who is planning for a VBAC, and she told me that she was a part of a VBAC Facebook group for moms where they would share their VBAC birth stories, they would ask questions, and seek out encouragement. And she told me that every day she would read these inspiring and empowering birth stories, and every time she read one, her excitement just grew and grew for her to one day share her own successful VBAC story with this Facebook group so that she could be an encouragement and an inspiration to all those other women who were behind their screens and were planning for their own VBACs. This mama ended up having a beautiful baby boy vaginally and unmedicated, and the first thing that I said to her was that she was going to finally be able to share her amazing VBAC story now on that Facebook group. So having that community can really help you feel like you're not alone as you are going through this journey, and hearing those success stories come out of that community, whether it's online or with meeting with women in person, it can really help just encourage and build up your confidence for your own VBAC story. The seventh tip that I'm giving you is the most important one, mama, and it is just to keep educating yourself. A VBAC is generally a very attainable birth goal. About 90% of women with past cesareans are candidates, but only 10% of women get a VBAC, often because they, one, don't even know it's an option, or their healthcare provider discourages it. So once you know that it's an option, it's important that you start learning about how to make that option a reality. So learning about things such as diet and exercise during pregnancy to help with a VBAC, the benefits and risks for a VBAC in your specific situation, how using Pitocin or an epidural can affect your labor, and learn about the process of birth and how to trust your body through each stage. Now, I know saying just go out there and learn about VBACs can feel really daunting and unhelpful, so I wanted to give you some resources so that you have some places to start. VBACfacts.com has an online course that you can take to help educate yourself on preparing and accomplishing your VBAC. ICANN.org is the International Cesarean Awareness Network that has answers to frequently asked questions and links to Facebook groups that you can join. And Lamaze.org has reliable and understandable information and statistics. They have positive VBAC stories and online VBAC classes as well. And I'll link these websites and their specific resources down below so that you can continue learning and be empowered by that knowledge that you're getting. And if you guys have questions that you would like to ask me, make sure you write them down in the comments below. And, depending on the frequently asked questions, I can do one or several questions that you guys have about VBACs. So those are my VBAC tips for having your beautiful and healing VBAC. And I want to encourage you by saying that your birth experience can be powerful and uplifting even if it doesn't go according to plan. I hope this video helps give you the tools to help you feel in control of your birth experience, empowered by it, and to be heard and respected every step of the way by your care team. All of you have strong, capable bodies that are built for birth and worthy of an incredible birth experience. So thanks for being with me in this video, mama, and I will see you in the next one.